Hey everyone, this is Alex here, and in this video, I'm going to go over my positive EV betting workflow, going over the bets I place, how I find them, the ones I avoid, my thought process through it all, and some of the mistakes I've made in the past. Um, and yeah, so let's get into it. So, what I want to start with is kind of just explaining how my year has gone, what I've learned, the mistakes I've made, and how I've been able to rebound here. So I started this year with about a $5,000 bankroll. I was making money about 500 to $1,000 a month for my first 4 months, I would say, through about April, May, June, so maybe 5, 6 months. This is about July. I hit my peak here. This was, I think, $5,000 profit. And then it kind of all started to come crashing down. I actually went negative right here for a bit. Um, so I kind of want to just explain maybe why I think that happened and what I changed here to now start performing a little bit better. So I think I started to get a bit trigger happy. I would log on and just place pretty much every wager that would pop up on the positive EV screen without really taking a look at them. I became overconfident. Um, when I really didn't know that as much as I thought. Um, so yeah, I wasn't really looking at the bets individually and kind of just trusting the positive EV tool entirely and not really looking at what I was betting on. The other thing was that this time, honestly, right here, I was in New Jersey for a week, which is one of the best states to be in for sports betting. However, I was probably there at the worst time possible. So for those of you who follow the sports calendar, right, I went during the MLB All-Star break week, which is notoriously the worst week for sports. There's pretty much nothing on. You get like the home run derby and the one All-Star game, but there's no football on, there's no basketball on. Baseball's on a break. There's no hockey on. There was pretty much just like tennis and some soccer matches. So there really wasn't much. And I got so excited to be in New Jersey just because there were so many more sports books there than there are in Connecticut. I was using Hard Rock and BetMGM and Bet Rivers and all the DFS sites like Prize Picks and Underdog and all those. And I was just forcing bets that just weren't valuable, didn't have value, just because I had the opportunity to place more bets. So, one thing I've really learned is to not force anything. You need to just stick to what works, and that is kind of what I'm going to go over today, what's been working. But the one thing to note is do not force a bet. If you're not fully certain in your edge or in the value, I just wouldn't place the bet. It's not worth it. Like there's plenty of bets. You're gonna get a ton down if you follow my workflow here that I'm gonna explain. Just do not force bets that don't have guaranteed value. I understood that there were going to be swings up and down with positive EV betting. It's not arbitrage where, guaranteed profit. There's going to be swings. This is variance going up and down. However, something started to feel off. I had 2,000, over 2,000 bets in July, and I was down. I think there was a 3 week period where I went down 7 grand in 3 weeks, and I was just saying to myself that this is just a variance swing. But over that many bets, right, you start to doubt your edge. So I kind of just tore it all down. I looked at all the splits between what books I was winning on, what I was losing on, the types of bets I was winning, the types of bets I was losing. I got Pickett Pro for a month to download my CSV of all my bets, calculate, my expected profits, what I was actually getting, the lines were closing at. I did a lot of in-depth research and I came to some very insightful conclusions. So, although this was a tough period and probably the worst I've experienced, I learned a ton and I'm going to explain everything now. The biggest mistake I was making was blindly riding the exchanges from the positive EV tool. As you can see, the exchanges generally have higher EV percentages, but this is just based on your devigging method and what book you're devigging to. If I click on this, this is devigging to FanDuel. I think almost everyone would agree that Novig is a sharper book than FanDuel. I'm not saying FanDuel's not as bad as DraftKings or Hard Rock or BetMGM, but still a $20 billion company, so you have to take some weight, but they do make a lot of mistakes. Novig is an exchange peer-to-peer, very, very sharp. This is saying that there's a 9% EV to FanDuel. So even though we think Novig is sharper than FanDuel, this is what you have to watch out for, because if I bet this, right, I think I'm getting good value because the fair line here is 139. But as you can see, FanDuel is offering the worst odds here. Everyone else is closer to Novig than they are to FanDuel. And here's another exchange, Profitex. They're the closest to Novig. So you would think that if we trusted these the most, this fair line is not 140. It should be somewhere in between 160 and 220, right? So maybe 180, 190. So that's where you kind of fall into the trap of these exchanges. And what you'll notice is if you've used the smart money feature, this actually points out large positions on the exchanges. So here's our same guy, Jaden Higgins, under 2.5. This is telling me to bet it on FanDuel. And it's comparing him to these exchanges. So these are the lines that are showing up on the positive EV tool when you add them, and you're filling the liquidity of the sharp bettors. So my issue was that I was just blindly opening the positive EV tool, betting every line I would see on Profitex and Novig, and I'm essentially filling these sharp bets that Sharp Money is now pointing out. And that was a big issue. Another thing to look out for on the positive EV tool is when you start to see the same bet pop up on a few different books, right? So Jaden Higgins is 3.5 on Novig and Profitex. This one is Zach Benson, over half an assist on two different books. When you start to see the same bet pop up as good value on multiple books, I would argue that there starts to be an issue with the book you're devigging to, not the one that it's saying. Let me explain that a little further. Like we said before, FanDuel is offering the worst odds on plus 122. And it's saying that to devig to FanDuel, the fair value is 140. And just by looking at the rest of the market, we concluded that that fair value doesn't really make sense. So even though the positive EV tool is saying there's good value on Novig and there's good value on Profitex, I would argue the best value on this screen right now is under 3.5 at minus 166, because that's very positive EV to Novig and the line is close to Profitex. I'm not saying I would bet it, I'm just saying based on a value of this bet, this EV tool is kind of incorrectly telling you where the value is. And so there's ways you can edit your settings and stuff like that. It's not saying the positive EV tool is bad. It just means you can't blindly ride whatever it says. So first I'm going to show you how to customize your Sharp books in what I would recommend. Doesn't mean it's right. This is just what I use, what I like, and has worked for me. So first of all, you want to get all the Sharp books in there. I'm sorry, FanDuel, I'm going to have to take you out. There's just better books to devig to. Pinnacle is the best. Make sure we have Novig, okay, and Profitex. I'd say these are probably the best. And Pinnacle, this is how to weight the books. So it just means which odds you take into account more. So I'm most familiar with Pinnacle, Novig, and Profitex. So I generally give them higher weights. Sport Trade, Circa's pretty good, but and Bookmaker, I'm just not as familiar with. I still have to do some more testing and stuff and see how those react. But I know that Pinnacle, Novig, and Profitex have worked for me in to devig to in the past for a while. So this is just what I like to do. So when you do that, That's just telling you what your EV percentage is. So I'm not married to this EV percentage. I still look at every bet and I look at all the lines to see if I should place it or not. But if you really do care about the EV percentage, then you can play around with those weights and find out what's best for you. But then what I like to do is make sure that at least two or three of those sharp books are aligned. We want to find where the one book we're betting on is the one that's incredibly unaligned with the rest of the market. So let's see what we can find. Okay, so here's an example of some pretty clear value on Fanatics here for Jahmyr Gibbs over 25.5 receiving yards at minus 105. So this is devigging to Pinnacle, which is showing clear value on this because this has a rip towards the over. It's actually arbitrage to Pinnacle. So this is giving you a pretty good EV percentage. If you look at the rest of the market though, it doesn't look that much value, right? Most of them are around minus 110, 115, some 120, right? But when you keep going, you see Novig and ProfitX. You're arbitrage to both of these exchanges. So that's now three books that we're arbitrage to. This is definitely an easy bet for me. Here's another just ridiculous one. We only have one sharp book on here, ProfitX. It's clearly arbitrage to ProfitX, but you could also just see the overall market consensus is that this should not be plus 140. I wish I didn't have insane limits on Fanatics or I'd be robbing them every night. But like, yeah, something like this where you could just clearly tell, even without a ton of sharp books, like there's enough. If there was only one or two other books here, I would say, avoid it because you can't really get a gauge. But when there's five, six, seven books that are all heavily favored towards this over and you're getting the over at plus 140 on Fanatics, this is just clear value. So here's a really interesting example. So this under 44.5 in tonight's game says it has a 12.79% EV percentage. It's saying that minus 165 on Fanatics is good value compared to the minus 236 fair value that it's calculated. So it's really just being misconstrued because this spread is enormous. It's saying that you could get the over at plus 141 or the under at minus 5,000. That just means that this market is not very liquid. There's not a lot of people betting on it yet, which doesn't make a ton of sense because it's a total in a game tonight, but whatever. It's saying that the fair value of this, if you were to just put these two lines in a fair value calculator, it would say the fair value is like minus 2,000 or something crazy like that. And so it's taking into account sport trade too. So that's where it's getting the minus 236. So if I were to just blindly bet on this, thinking I'm getting a 12% expected value, look at the rest of the market. Like, yeah, it's the best line, but not by much. And you could see one of the tighter spreads is Novig, and Novig it's still not that far off from. So by looking at all these other books, you could tell that the market consensus is definitely not minus 236. That's the issue about the exchanges, is in a not very liquid market, the spreads can get super wide and can, incorrectly calculate the fair value. So that's why you need to be looking at all of the lines and not just blindly riding them when you see a high EV percentage. So here's an example of a market that I would avoid. So like I said before, when you see the same bet on the positive EV tool for a bunch of different books, all saying they have good value, it might say more about the devigging book than the actual soft books you're trying to bet on. So on here you have Pinnacle that says the fair line in Pinnacle is 162. Almost every book on here you can get better than 162. So yes, even though we say Pinnacle's the sharpest book, that doesn't mean they can't be wrong. When you look at Novig, Novig has a super tight spread. The fair value of this spread is 184, 180 plus 185-ish. That's exactly what you're getting here. So when the sharp books are not aligned, I would just avoid the market entirely. There's plenty of other bets you can get. There's no point in forcing it. It's not clear what the fair value is here because the rest of the market, besides Pinnacle, is, somewhere around 190, 200 fair value, and Pinnacle's saying it's 162. Now, there's a chance that Pinnacle's right, but there's also a chance that this market starts to move towards the rest of the what the market consensus is, especially when there's exchanges that like Novig that's offering you pretty much the same value as Fanatics, BetMGM, Hard Rock. That's just why when you see a bet, if you have an exchange that you can get a very, very close or even better line, I would just avoid it entirely. That means the sharp books are not aligned. There's plenty of other bets. There's no point in forcing it. I would just avoid a market like this when the sharp book is the one that is pretty much not aligned with the rest of the market. Okay, so here I'm going to show you two examples of devigging the Pinnacle, one that I would bet, one that I wouldn't. So here it's saying bet MGM plus 120 is a good bet. Fair value in Pinnacle is minus 103. Now Pinnacle's definitely the sharpest book here, but the reasons I wouldn't place were one, it's the only sharp book on here. Two, there's no other book that is even close to where this is saying the fair value is. Now, yes, it's definitely sharper than all of these books, but when there's five other examples of the fair value being around maybe plus 140, 145-ish, I just wouldn't say that this is for sure the correct fair value. Now, I would assume these would come down a little, but I would also assume this to move a little because they're just so far off from the market consensus. Now, here's an example of one that I would bet. So on DraftKings, you can get Hartenstein over 9.5 rebounds plus 130. It's arbitrage to Pinnacle here, same as the other one. But if you look at the rest of the books, like no one else is offering really close to 130. These are 125, but these are one-way markets. So one-way markets, you can't devig a one-way market because there's no other side to. So saying this is plus 125 and not offering anything on this side, that's not a real market because there's nothing to compare it to. There's no fair value, fair line in that market. So if you look at the rest of the lines that do have an upper and lower bound, you're not getting anywhere close to plus 130. And Pinnacle is pretty aligned with all of the other books that are offering both sides. So this is clear value on DraftKings. Okay, here's one final example of a bet that I would place. Kevin Durant under 2.5 threes plus 108 on DraftKings, arbitrage to Pinnacle. Looking at the rest of the lines, plus 108 is pretty much the best line you can get out of any book. And it's also arbitrage to Novig, and it's very positive EV to ProfitX. This is another one where you just kind of want to look at all of the lines, make sure it's not to make sure that it's the best line available, but that it's pretty much an outlier compared to the rest of the lines. And then one where all of the sharp books are pretty aligned is just another slam dunk. One last thing I wanted to say is as you're learning all these strategies and if you're new to the positive EV tool or positive EV betting in general, I would just be careful with your unit sizing. You're still learning, so you don't want to lose all your money while you're still learning, right? If you got a trading job, they're not going to give you $1 million to trade with on the first day. They're going to train you on their strategies and their, tools and such until you start to prove that you can do things successfully and, make money, make your hypothetical money, right? And then they'll give you the money to trade with. So since it's your own money, I would be even more cautious. So that would just be a little advice. You'll start to gain confidence as you do this more and more. You'll start to notice trends in the sports books. Certain sports books tend to mess up the same market over and over again. And you'll start to gain confidence in that sense, where you kind of learn which lines to look for on certain books and the ones that are consistently messed up due to each sports book creating their own model and trying to create their own lines. There's going to be inherent biases that are away from the market average. So you'll start to pick those up on the sports books that you have in your state. And yeah, then you'll gain the confidence and then you can start really throwing around some units and making some real cash. All right, that pretty much wraps it up. I think we went over most of the scenarios that you'll encounter. Ones where there's a clear outlier, the ones that there's not, when the sharp books are aligned, when they're not aligned, when there's not enough books to make a clear assumption of the fair value. I think that we kind of covered all that. I'd say the key takeaways, right? Don't force anything. If you are unsure, just don't bet it. There's plenty of other bets you can make. I wouldn't force anything. Um, Look at all the lines. Don't blind ride anything. Make sure that what you're getting is true, clear value. And yeah, if you have any other questions, here's my Twitter. If you want to throw me a follow, DM me with any questions. Um, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and yeah, thanks for watching.